Michael Aaron Patton went into a Florida courtroom in 2024 charged with grand theft after he was accused of purchasing 2 luxury vehicles from car dealerships using counterfeit checks. Before the day was over, he was sentenced to 30 days in jail. But here's the weird part. His trial hadn't even started yet. He was serving jail time because he refused to sign his name properly on a court document. Now that sounds insane, but these kinds of things happen more frequently than you think. Patton served that time because he was found in contempt of court. There are lots of things you can do to get a contempt charge, and Patton did a lot of them. Throughout the pretrial process, he made everything unnecessarily complicated. He said he wanted to represent himself, only to ask for an attorney after a jury had already been chosen. Then he asked if he could have a lawyer present, but still represent his case on his own. He filed a motion to postpone his case so he could hire a private attorney, even though he previously had one who withdrew from the case. And then, after all of the delays and theatrics, when he was asked to sign a court document, he refused to sign his real name. When people do things like refuse to sign their names on court documents, question the legitimacy of the court and the law, or use confusing and arcane words that sound like legal terms but don't mean anything, it's because they're part of the growing world of pseudo-law. You've probably seen people like this. Sometimes they call themselves sovereign citizens. Sometimes they talk about being a free man on the land. And a lot of them complain about taxes being against the law. Here's the big takeaway. It's all nonsense. There is a long and complicated history of people incorrectly believing things about the law that are definitely not true. Some of it comes from an innocent place. After all, the legal world is a complicated one, with lots of details and industry terms that your average person doesn't understand. That's literally the reason that lawyers exist. Hundreds of years ago, people had to represent themselves in trials, but the law was so complicated that people often didn't understand what they were doing. So an entire career was created just for people to study and understand the law. It's that complicated. So it's not hard to imagine that your average person doesn't understand it. But the people obsessed with pseudo-legal nonsense aren't your average person. Let's start with the sovereign citizens. This is a phenomenon that began in the United States in the 1970s, but it has expanded in recent years to other English-speaking countries like Canada and Australia. The sovereign citizen movement is made up of several different subgroups of people who just don't like the government. Some of them are anti-government, some of them like to weaponize the legal system to cause delays and irritation to others, some are tax protesters, and some of them are financial scammers. But they all have one thing in common. They're all comfortable believing conspiracy theories. While the movement may have started back in the 1970s, it really gained popularity with the advent of the internet. Suddenly, it was very easy to share misinformation with the general public through free social media venues like Facebook groups and YouTube channels. Now, what kind of conspiracy theories do sovereign citizens believe? Well, buckle up, it's going to be a weird ride. First, sovereign citizens think that courts have no actual jurisdiction over people. They believe that there are secret tricks you can do, such as writing specific phrases on documents and using legal loopholes that make you immune and exempt from government laws and regulations. Many of them go further than that, claiming that the US federal government is entirely illegitimate. And because of that belief, they think they can do basically whatever they want, as long as they keep to themselves and don't actively seek out and hurt others. It's easy to understand what it is about the sovereign citizen movement that appeals to so many. In a world where people have a hard time making ends meet financially, it can be really tempting to believe that there is a secret system that can allow you to get out of paying all kinds of bills. Many sovereign citizens even reject the use of driver's licenses, social security cards, and vehicle registrations. They see all of these things as extensions of the illegitimate power of the government. And that's where sovereign citizens align with the beliefs of the tax protesters. America has a long history of fighting against what they believe to be unfair taxes. After all, the Boston Tea Party only happened because American colonists refused to pay a hidden tax that the British added to imported tea. But the modern tax protest movement, which started in the 1940s, is based more on the idea that the federal government taxing individual income is unconstitutional and therefore legally unnecessary to abide by. If you asked a tax protester what the legal grounds are for their beliefs, you will get a different answer from all of them, and most of those answers would be long and confusing and supported by dubious claims. Some complain about the country not abiding by the gold standard anymore. Some say the Constitution isn't explicit about if taxes even can be collected, and some claim that the government isn't a country but a corporation. Now, none of these things are entirely true. Some of them are completely made up, And all of them conveniently ignore the many decades of established case law that refutes every one of the claims. The same goes for what is known as the free man on the land movement. The name free man on the land describes the central belief of the group. When a person is on the land where they live, they are entirely free. That means that according to them, no laws apply to them unless they have consented to them. They believe that they are able to exist independent of the government based solely on their decision to do so, meaning the rule of law doesn't apply to them. You probably won't be surprised to find out that they also try to find ways to avoid paying taxes too. So, what do all these groups have in common? Ultimately, it all boils down to people who want to decide everything for themselves without interference from government entities. And sure, that's the dream, isn't it? But how realistic is it? The simple answer is not at all realistic. It involves a lot of magical thinking and fantastical leaps of logic. And that's where we come back to pseudo-legal language. The reason this movement has taken hold over so many people isn't just that it's appealing to control your own destiny and not have to pay taxes. It's that there are serious-sounding phrases that make it seem believable that it could be true. Think of it this way. If someone told you that leaving your paycheck under your pillow would cause the Freedom Fairy to visit you at night and protect you from unwanted taxes, they would be laughed out of the room. But when they create complicated jargon that seems to prove itself with evidence and case law, it's easy for someone to believe if they don't actually do any real research. And more than that, it's possible nowadays to research something completely made up on the internet and come to the conclusion that what you believe is true. Because of the internet, confirmation bias has become easier and easier. If you go to Google and search for certain key phrases about sovereign citizens or tax protests, you will find plenty of websites that support those ideas. The problem is, those aren't legally accurate websites, but most people don't know how to tell the difference between cleverly worded misinformation and the actual truth. So they choose to believe whatever they want to believe, which is what confirmation bias is. But here's the truth about a large percentage of people in the pseudo-legal movement. They don't even really believe their own arguments when it comes down to it. Most sovereign citizens and tax protesters and free man on the land advocates still drive on public roads. They occasionally use libraries, and if their house is burning, they expect the fire department to show up and put it out. All of those things are paid for and provided by the government, courtesy of the taxes that everyone pays. If they really believe in governing only themselves, you'd think they would avoid taking advantage of the things that everyone else is paying taxes for, right? But you'd be wrong. They want the benefits that other taxpayers pay for, but they don't want to pay for them. A clear example of this obvious contradiction happened in 2009. Tea Party Republicans, who became famous for protesting what they called the intrusion of big government, showed up to protest in Washington, D.C. So what happened? In the hours after the protest, Tea Party members complained about how difficult it was to get around the city conveniently on the city's public transit. And public transit is, of course, paid for by that big government they were complaining about, using the taxes that the Tea Party had no interest in paying. So they wanted better, faster, and more convenient public transit accommodations so they could get to their protest, where they complained about having to pay for public transit at all. You can see why dealing with pseudo-legal nonsense is so frustrating for people like lawyers and judges, people who have spent years of their lives becoming educated professionals in their field. The sovereign citizens and tax protesters are claiming expertise they don't have so they can get out of a shared responsibility that every other citizen accepts, even when they don't love them. That's why sometimes people like Michael Aaron Patton, who allegedly break the law and then try to claim that the law doesn't apply to them or use the law to cause delays and problems for the court system, end up in contempt of court and serving time before their trial even begins. In other words, don't fall for pseudo-legal nonsense. If some tax loophole or claim of freedom sounds too good to be true, that's because it is. If you want to learn more about the wild claims and absurd lies hiding in plain sight in the world of the law, be sure to like and subscribe. That's it for this episode of No Way That's Legal. We'll see you next time.